we are ready to get started on the second part of our study into proving Yahushua is Messiah from what's called Old Testament or Tanakh scriptures. Are we ready for this? We shared part 1 last week. Part 1 is primarily aimed toward Torah observant believers in Messiah. Had some unique messages for you. And but this week I'm going to kind of focus on those who might be Jewish believers. I'm sorry, I should say those who might be Jewish but are not yet believers in Messiah. And so, and we're going to start from some prophecies that are, regarded by almost all of, maybe all of the rabbis and the Jewish people as being a definite messianic prophecy in Isaiah chapter 11. We're just going to kind of work from there. But first of all, it is something that we can do. I need to make sure that we understand this is something that's very possible to do, and that is demonstrate from just looking at the Tanakh or the Old Testament, just looking at that, demonstrate that Yahushua, the one that we regard as the Messiah, really is the Messiah. And we can show that. In order to show that, we do have to know the Hebrew Scriptures. We have to know the prophecies. We have to know Isaiah and Jeremiah. And there's a whole bunch of others. But we're going to focus mainly on Isaiah. But, I mean, how many of us could do that as believers in Messiah? How many of us could sit down and go through the Old Testament Scriptures, not even crack open the New Testament yet, and clearly demonstrate what the Messiah is supposed to do, what he's supposed to be like? It's an important thing. If we don't want to just assume he's Messiah, we have to, just because our culture does, we have to look into the Scriptures ourselves and say, okay, what prophecies show this? What prophecies show, okay, Yahushua, the Messiah, is supposed to suffer and die? Where is that? And Paul, Paul the Apostle, Shaul, he was able to do this. He was able to sit down with his Jewish brethren, as it says here, when he desired to cross to Achaia, the brethren wrote exhorting disciples to receive him. When he arrived, he greatly helped those who had believed through grace, for he vigorously refuted the Jews publicly, showing, not from the book of Romans, not from Acts, not from, but from the Scriptures, that Yahushua is the Messiah. Well, what Scriptures were the Jewish people reading from? The Law and the Prophets. So he was able to do this from the Law and the Prophets and their writings. And it says in Acts 9:22 that Saul increased all the more in strength and confounded the Jews who dwelt in Damascus, proving that this Yahushua is the Messiah. And we see as part of his the part of establishing the kingdom was to go around and show people who the king is. Every kingdom has a king, right? And so he was, as part of his kingdom work, he was going around and showing from the Scriptures who the king was. And this is the final thing that we have recorded of him actually doing. In Acts 28:23, so when they appointed him a day, many came to him in his lodging, to whom he explained and solemnly testified of the kingdom of Elohim, persuading them concerning Yahushua from both the law of Moshe and from the prophets. We're going to focus on the prophets today, and we'll talk about Torah next week. But He solemnly testified of the kingdom. That was his goal, to testify concerning the kingdom. And he persuaded them from morning to evening from the scriptures. He encouraged people to reason with him in the scriptures. And so, how about us? Can we do that as part of our kingdom mandate, to go therefore? And so I want to do this for you today, and it's one way of being able to sit down with a Jewish person and show them from the Tanakh that they accept that Yahushua is the Messiah. One reason why Jewish people have not seen the fact that he's the Messiah is because we have a lot of things in traditional Christianity that have become associated with the Messiah that they know, according to the Torah and the prophets and the writings, according to the Old Testament, are not scriptural. Such as the forsaking of the Sabbath day and creating a new one, such as the forsaking of the festivals, such as the eating of pork and unclean animals, such as the embracing of pagan-rooted festivals instead of the biblical-based ones. And so they're not provoked to any jealousy by all these unbiblical things that have been associated with him. But if you can take a minute and look and see that really he did not approve of those things, and we'll talk more about that next week. But and so we have this problem here with Christians trying to witness to Jewish people regarding the Messiah, and besides the fact, church history has shown that those who call themselves believers in this Messiah were oppressive and rude and murderous. I mean, that's not what Messiah was about, is it? I mean, he was very forgiving, very long-suffering, very kind, and he was not oppressive and murderous. And so they haven't done a very good job of teaching the Jewish people what he's really like. But what if we could do that? What if we can show, not only from Scripture, but also our example of love and service and kindness, who the Messiah truly is? What might happen? Paul wrote to the Gentiles. He said in Romans 11:13, "If I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh and save some of them. For if their being cast away is reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be? But life from the dead." Now this cast away is not a cast away necessarily unto damnation, but they decided not to receive the king. They decided to not receive the king. And so how can they understand the kingdom and what the future holds for us? Now, in my mind, I don't condemn a lot of the Jewish people because they have never heard of the Messiah. Many of them have never heard of him because the Messiah who is in the Scriptures kept Torah. He obeyed the festivals and encouraged the disciples to follow the festivals. He said not even one jot or tittle has passed from the law until all are fulfilled. Not even the smallest stroke of a letter. And so, what's going on? What's going on here? We have in our generation, for the first time in 2,000 years, in our generation, we have more and more people coming who are Jewish, coming to understand that Yahushua really is the Messiah, even those living in Israel, because some of them are now being presented with a biblical Messiah, a biblical one. There are rabbis in Israel today who believe Yahushua is the Messiah, Orthodox rabbis. Not very many, but there are some. And there are many who believe in him secretly. And so what about Christianity? I mean, what happened to all the Torah observant believers? What happened to them? They were called Nazarenes. The Christians wrote about them. It says, well, they used not only the New Testament, but the Old Testament as well, as the Jews do. And this is Epiphanius writing about them. He says, these sectarians did not call themselves Christians, but Nazarenes. And then Jerome wrote, it said, the Nazarenes accept Messiah in such a way that they do not cease to observe the old law. So there always was this separate group of people that said, no, the law should be kept. And yet they were believers in Messiah. And so the two are not incongruent. The two are not opposed to each other. In fact, Messiah was all about proving and showing and keeping Torah. And so, if we are ministering to one who is Jewish, how can we show that Yahushua really is Messiah? And if you are Jewish and you're not a believer, how can I show from Scripture that Yahushua really is Messiah? I hope to do that. I hope to do that today. And we're going to start with a prophecy that you're probably going to recognize. In Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, it says, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse. All right, what we're going to do here is we are going to go through Isaiah chapter 11, and we're going to start to write down and make a note of all the characteristics of what the Messiah is like. And so starting here, what would the Messiah be like? It says he is a rod from the stem of Jesse. He's the son of David. And it goes on to say, shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. A branch. All right. So we add that to the list. He's called a branch from Jesse's roots. And it says, the Spirit of Yahweh shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of Yahweh. All right. So the fullness of Yahweh's Spirit rests upon him. And so he has a lot of knowledge. In verse 3, his delight is in the fear of Yahweh. And he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, nor decide by the hearing of his ears. And so he is, as we can see here, he is a judge. And so he will be a judge. That's another characteristic. In verse 4 of Isaiah 11, but with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. The breath of his lips, he will slay the wicked. Very interesting. So we'll add this to the list. He will strike the earth with his mouth and with the breath of his lips. I should say not lips, but breath. All right. And righteousness shall be the belt of his loins, and faithfulness the belt of his waist. So we add these to the description here. Righteousness and faithfulness will be his belt or belts. And it describes the time period in which he reigns. It says, the wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the young goat, the calf and the young lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. So a futuristic time. This has not happened yet. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young ones shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play by the cobra's hole, the weaned child shall put his hand in the viper's den. They shall not hurt nor destroy in all my holy mountain, for the earth shall be full of the knowledge of Yahweh as the waters cover the sea. And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, who shall stand as a banner to the people, for the Gentiles shall seek him, and his resting place shall be glorious. All right, so he is this root of Jesse we talked about. But he will stand as a banner to the people, and Gentiles, it says here, will seek him, and his resting place will be glorious. So, adding this to the list of characteristics, he will stand as a banner to the people, and the Gentiles shall seek him. Interesting. And it says his resting place shall be glorious. It shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Syria and Egypt and Pathros to Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and islands of the sea. And so he is going to recover the remnant. He will set up a banner for the nations, and will assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. So he is going to assemble, he's going to gather together Israel and Judah. So he's going to be a light to the Gentiles, and he is going to assemble Israel and Judah together. We're still waiting on that, aren't we? All right. Now, what I want to do is share with you a verse that will clearly connect these descriptions of the Messiah in Isaiah chapter 11 with another prophecy. And it's in Isaiah chapter 49. You can turn there if you like. And by the way, I highly encourage you to read from, if you're Jewish, the 1917 edition of the JPS, the Tanakh. The newer version, in the preface, they acknowledge they're trying to keep things as far as tradition goes in their translation. And one of the traditions is that Yahushua is not the Messiah. And so whenever they came across some of these messianic prophecies, they really weren't very honest to the text, whoever did this. But the one back in 1917 was a whole lot closer. So, but for the sake of clarity, so that those who are believers in Messiah, we're just reading here from the New King James, but it reads pretty close to the JPS. All right, so Isaiah chapter 49, verses 1 and 2. It says, "Listen, O coastlands, to me, and take heed, you peoples from afar." He's talking to people who are far away, Gentile and Jew. It says, "Yahweh has called me from the womb. From the matrix of my mother he has made mention of my name, and he has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he has hidden me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver he has hidden me. All right. Now, whoever this is, it makes clear that this sounds like a person. I mean, they come from the womb. The person has a mother, and he has a certain name, and yet his mouth is like a sharp sword. And he's a polished shaft. This word here is arrow in the Hebrew. In his quiver, he's hidden me. That's why there's a quiver. Okay. So, looking back at Isaiah 11, does anything sound familiar? We remember that he will strike the earth with his mouth and with his lips, right? Well, this one who is in Isaiah chapter 49, what does he have? He has in his mouth a sharp sword. A sharp sword. And so, isn't a sword the instrument of judgment? I mean, that is what what people used in that time as an instrument of judgment, the sharp sword. And these arrows, and he is in Yahweh's quiver. Okay? And so we can see at least one possible connection of Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 11. But let's keep reading. And it says, "And he said to me, You are my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Then I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for nothing and in vain. Yet surely my just reward is with Yahweh, and my work with my Elohim." Now, in these verses, just 1 minute here. In these particular verses, we see that there is the one who is in these verses is actually called Israel. That's what he's called. And yet, he's like a person who's come forth from the womb, and whoever this person is, he seems a little discouraged here. He says, I've labored in vain. But he takes comfort in his reward with Yahweh. He takes comfort in that. All right. So, why would he be called Israel? We're going to get to that in a minute. We want to see some of the connections between Isaiah 49 and the connections between that and Isaiah chapter 11. All right. Well, he goes on to say here that, "And now Yahweh says, who formed me from the womb to be his servant, to bring Jacob back to him, so that Israel is gathered to him. For I shall be glorious in the eyes of Yahweh. My Elohim shall be my strength. Indeed, he says, it is too small a thing that you should be my servant, to raise up the tribes of Jacob and restore the preserved ones of Israel. I will also give you as a light to the Gentiles, that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth." Very interesting characteristics here that tie in very close to what we see in Isaiah 11. Remember, in Isaiah 11, he would assemble Israel and Judah together. That was his goal, his role in Isaiah chapter 11, was to assemble Israel and Judah together. And so what do we have? This servant of Isaiah 49 restoring the preserved ones of Israel, so that Israel is gathered to Yahweh. That's what he's called to do. This servant. Very interesting. And you notice also it says the Gentiles shall seek him. It says you will be as a light to the Gentiles. And that matches up with what we saw in Isaiah chapter 11, that the Gentiles shall seek him. And so this servant in Isaiah chapter 49 is called to do the same things that the one in Isaiah chapter 11 is to do. And so we can connect these prophecies together, that the Messiah would, as in Isaiah chapter 11, it shows the Messiah as one who assembles Israel, strikes the earth with his mouth, his lips, and is sought by the Gentiles. And when we see Isaiah 49, it shows Messiah, or this servant, as one who gathers Israel, has a mouth made like a sword, and is a light to the Gentiles. Do we see the connection between the two? I find that to be pretty interesting. Now, we can move on here. I want to look at Isaiah 49 again and notice some of the attributes of this servant in Isaiah 49 that would, because once we've established there's a connection between the two, we can start to draw out other characteristics of this servant in Isaiah 49. We see here, listen, O coastlands, to me, and take heed, you peoples from afar. Yahweh has called me from the womb, from the matrix of my mother. He has made mention of my name. He has made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he has hidden me, and made me a polished shaft. In his quiver he has hidden me. And so what are these characteristics that we could add to the list which we had earlier of Isaiah chapter 11? We had these characteristics here. What can we add to the list? Well, he would be called from the womb. Yahweh makes mention of his name while he's in the womb. That would be one. As we see here, from the matrix of my mother, he's made mention of my name. He called him from the womb. So this is a person, not a nation, and yet it's still called a servant. And we also see he is hidden like a shaft in a quiver. Very interesting. This servant in Isaiah 49 is hidden. Sorry. It says, he has hidden me in the shadow of his hand. In his quiver, he has hidden me. And so whoever this is, he is one who is hidden from someone, from some people. There will be people who don't recognize who he is. That's one of the predictions. And so that's why we add that to the list. All right. Move on to Isaiah 49 verse 3. It says, and he said to me, you are my servant, O Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Now that's a very interesting one. Why would he be called Israel? Well, we're going to add that to the list. Why is he called Israel? Well, the reason why he's called Israel, even though he's Messiah, is because he is actually accomplishing what Yahweh called Israel to do, which was to draw all people to himself. Draw all people to Yahweh. Yahweh wanted Israel to be a light in the land, a righteous light in the land, so that other nations would come and be drawn to him. So he is the embodiment of Israel. And of course, he is literally a son of Israel. And so he can be called Israel. Just like you might be called an Israelite, I might be called an Israelite or Jewish. He's called Israel as well. But obviously that doesn't mean that he is the nation, that's Isaiah 49 speaking of the nation of Israel. There are too many things that would not make sense. Then I said, I have labored in vain, I have spent my strength for nothing and in vain, yet surely my just reward is with Yahweh. My work is with my Elohim. And so he's exasperated here. He spent all of his strength. So we're going to add that to the list. He has a time of discouragement, but he chooses to trust in Yahweh's rewards. All right, so we move on to Isaiah 49 verse 5, and this is where we make it very clear this cannot be the nation of Israel. This Isaiah 49 servant cannot be the nation of Israel. Now Yahweh says, who formed me from the womb, obviously a person, to be his servant, and the servant of Isaiah, to bring Jacob back to him, so that Israel is gathered to him. For I shall be glorious in the eyes of Yahweh, my Elohim shall be my strength. This servant is gathering Israel. And so he cannot be Israel, he is gathering Israel. He can't be, this Isaiah 49 can't be talking about the nation of Israel. It's talking about a person who raises up the tribes of Jacob and restores the preserved ones of Israel. Therefore he is distinguished from the nation of Israel. So there's a difference. And so we can add to the list here, he's Yahweh's servant. That's important. Servant of Isaiah. And we can see that it says, he is the salvation of Yahweh to the ends of the earth. It says here, Yahweh said, he said, you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. So he is going to actually be Yahweh's salvation to the ends of the earth. So he's going to be extolled very high. He's going to be exalted. He has a time of discouragement, and yet he is exalted because he trusts in Yahweh's rewards. All right. Now, I want us to notice, just a minute as I'm getting to the right screen, a connection also in Isaiah chapter 11. It says he is called a branch from Jesse's roots. That there is another scripture in the book of Jeremiah in chapter 23 and verse 5. There's another scripture which shows that he is a branch. Now, the one in Isaiah chapter 11, the word translated branch is netzer. But the one in Jeremiah 23, which is clearly a messianic prophecy, says that, behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, I will raise to David a branch, Tanakh, of righteousness. A king shall reign and prosper and execute judgment and righteousness in the earth. So in this case, the branch is called Tanakh. Now, the reason why I'm pointing this out is because there's a characteristic here of the Messiah that I want to point out, and that is that he would be called from the womb, and it says Yahweh would mention his name while in the womb. He would make mention of his name. What actually is the name of the coming Messiah? Well, we see here that Messiah is called a branch in Isaiah 11, branch in Jeremiah 23 verse 5, Zechariah chapter 6 verse 9. Let's read this. Then the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, receive the gift from the captives from Heldai, Tobiah and Jediah, who have come from Babylon, and go the same day and enter the house of Josiah, son of Zephaniah. Take the silver and gold, make an elaborate crown, and set it on the head of Joshua. The Hebrew is Yahushua. And I apologize here, my Hebrew font is not showing up on the PowerPoint. But in the Hebrew, this name reads Yahushua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So he's telling Zechariah to enter the house of Josiah and take silver and gold, make a crown out of it, and set it on the head of the high priest, whose name is Yahushua. Then speak to him, saying, thus says Yahweh of hosts, saying, behold the man whose name is the branch. Well, what was his name? Yahushua. Who is the branch? It's the Messiah. So this man, Yahushua, Yahushua, has the name of the branch. And it says, from his place he shall branch out, and he shall build the temple of Yahweh. Yes, he shall build the temple of Yahweh. He shall bear the glory, and shall sit and rule as a priest. He shall sit and rule on the throne, so he shall be a priest on his throne, and the council of peace shall be between them both. And so there will be a priest who is also a king. So the Messiah is not only going to be the king, he's also going to be a priest. And the one that's named Joshua or Yahushua was a picture of what the branch or the Messiah was going to be doing. And he put this on his head. Why? Because he had the name of the Messiah. Now in Psalm chapter 110 verse 1, David is writing this, and it says, Yahweh said to my master. Well, who is David's master? Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Yahweh shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion. Rule in the midst of your enemies. So he's telling, David is saying, that Yahweh has told his master to rule as a king. Well, the only ones qualified to be rulers would be sons of David. And yet David is calling this particular ruler his master. And so we can see that this is identifying the Messiah. And we read more and we can see it pretty clearly. It says, your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power. This is a prediction. And the beauties of holiness, from the womb of the morning you have the dew of your youth. Yahweh has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. So here is one who is a ruler and yet also a priest, just like we saw in Zechariah chapter 6. Now he's not a priest after the order of Aaron. He is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. And we confirm this is what he does when he rules over. Yahweh is at your right hand. He shall execute kings in the day of his wrath. He's going to rule the planet. He executes kings. He shall judge among the nations. This is messianic here. Judge among the nations. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall execute the heads of many countries. He shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore he shall lift up the head. Lift up the head means execution. And so this is clearly a example of where there's a messianic figure who is ruling as king, but also a priest, just like Zechariah said. And that's why Zechariah put the crown on the head of the one named Yahushua and said, this man has the name of the branch. He shall rule as a priest on his throne. A council of peace shall be between them both. And so when we're adding to the list of messianic prophecies what he's going to be like, well, his name will be Yahushua, and he is both priest from Melchizedek and king. We can add these to the list of characteristics. Again, I'm sorry for the lack of the Hebrew font here. Didn't show up for some reason. So we can add these because of connecting one prophecy to the next. We can add all of these to the characteristics of what Messiah would do and what he would be like. All right. So we're going to continue here. Now, what I want to do is look into Isaiah chapter 52 and 53 and see if we can make some connections between some of the words which are said in Isaiah 52 and 53 to the prophecies that we have already have established as being messianic. We're going to start with Isaiah 52 verse 13. It says in Isaiah 52:13, behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Well, how more extolled and exalted and high could you get than to be a king? And you can't get any higher than that. That's as high as Yahweh will allow you to be. And so we see here that this, whoever this servant is, he's called a servant, is exalted and extolled and is very high. Well, other things are, just as many as were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. Sounds like he is going to suffer. He's going to be exalted, and yet he's also going to suffer. And it says, so shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him. Once again, the kings are impressed by this one. For what had not been told them they shall see, and what they had not heard they shall consider. But we see similar things to what we were looking at earlier. Now, in the JPS Tanakh, this word translated sprinkle, which is hazar in Hebrew, in that particular instance is translated startle. He shall startle many nations. But if you look up the Hebrew here, in Isaiah 52 and verse 15, the word that the JPS Tanakh translates sprinkle, which is hazah. Every other time it's translated sprinkle. And it's even found in Leviticus 16:14. he shall, when talking about the high priest, he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on this mercy seat on the east side, and before the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. And so this same Hebrew word, hazah, is translated sprinkle in other locations, such as in the Torah here. Okay, so I don't know why I've actually got this a little bit messed up, but I want to go back, and we notice when you look in the text, first of all, the one in Isaiah 52 is called a servant. We see that. He's called a servant. And accidentally. And we can also make a connection with him being a priest simply because he's sprinkling. Now, he's not functioning in the Aaronic high priest. He's functioning as a Melchizedek high priest. But he is a priest nonetheless, because it says, so shall he sprinkle many nations. And so we can make a connection between him being a priest here in Isaiah chapter 52, verses 13 through 15. And it says he will sprinkle many nations, the Gentiles. The Gentiles are going to be involved here. And kings are going to shut their mouths at him, the Gentile kings. They're going to shut their mouths at him. Well, there we go. The Gentiles shall seek him. Remember back in Isaiah chapter 11 we read of how the Gentiles would seek him, that he would be a light to the Gentiles in Isaiah 49 and Isaiah 11. There's a connection there as well. Just the first 3 verses here. And we go on to Isaiah chapter 53, verse 1. It says, "For who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed?" This indicates not everybody's going to believe in him. Not everyone's going to believe this report about this servant in Isaiah 52 and 53. And it says, to whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed? The arm of Yahweh. Well, you notice in Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 10, it says, "Behold, the Master Yahweh shall come with a strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him." Now, if the arm is ruling for Yahweh, then it must mean that Yahweh has a king who is called his arm. But isn't he at Yahweh's right hand, this Messiah? Isn't Messiah at the right hand of Yahweh? We read there in Psalm 110. And so when we get to Psalm chapter 40, it says, "His arm will rule for him. Behold, his reward is with him, his work before him. He will feed his flock like a shepherd." And so just this verse alone connects, and there's lots of others that would connect the arm of Yahweh with Yahweh's arm. Just 1 minute here. Now, that's also, I just checked, that's also reflected in the JPS, the Tanakh, the 1917 Tanakh, that his arm is ruling for him. And so that would also help us point to who this servant of Isaiah chapter 53 being a king as well. And so also we have an indication here that this arm of Yahweh, not everyone will have this arm of Yahweh revealed to them. There will be some that this servant will be hidden to. And didn't we see that as one of the characteristics of the servant in Isaiah 49 was that he is hidden in a quiver nonetheless. He's hidden, but he will be an instrument of justice and judgment, like an arrow. Like an arrow in a quiver. This messianic figure has the capability to execute judgment. So he's a king, and yet he's hidden from the eyes of some. All right. Didn't have those other two up there, sorry. But he's a priest, he's a king, he's Yahweh's servant, he's hidden in an arrow and a quiver. An arrow and a quiver, he's hidden. And so far there are three characteristics of what we know the Messiah is going to be like just from reading Isaiah 52:13 to 53 verse 1. We see at least three characteristics. All right. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant. A tender plant, and as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. And so here he is, this root, this plant, this what does it say? Tender plant and root out of dry ground. Doesn't this match up with some of the other verbiage we read about Messiah? For instance, we see, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse. We know that's a messianic prophecy. A branch shall grow from his roots. And then Jeremiah 23, behold, the days are coming, says Yahweh, I will raise to David a branch of righteousness. And Isaiah 6:12, or Zechariah 6:12, the man whose name is the branch. So whenever the scriptures here in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah are referring to the Messiah, one of the things they like to preface everything with is the stems and branches and things of that nature. And so when we get to Isaiah 53, we find the same thing. And so we could line up Isaiah 53 verse 2 with the earlier prophecy in Isaiah 11 where Messiah is referred to as a branch, as a plant of some kind, from Jesse's roots. And so he's this tender plant as a root out of dry ground. Just that alone, Isaiah 53:2, helps us to make a connection to Isaiah 11. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. This would explain why he would be hidden, because we hid our faces from him. That's why he's hidden. It's because he was rejected. That's why he would be these hidden arrows in a quiver in Isaiah 49, because he was rejected by the people. And so he is this hidden shaft, or this hidden arrow in the quiver. Once again, it all makes sense. And so another characteristic here, when we read this, is being that he was despised and rejected by men, is that he would have this time of discouragement. Remember Isaiah chapter 49, we read that earlier, that he had a moment where he was somewhat discouraged. And that would explain why he has this discouragement. Is because he's being rejected by men. And so, to me, these things all line up as the same person. So far, everything we read indicates that. And so, all right. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by Elohim, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we, like sheep, have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all. So he is dying for the sins of others. The reason why he is dying is not because of his own wrongs, but because of the wrongs of others. And we spoke a lot last week about the intricacies of how the righteousness of Yahweh cleanses us from sin, and how that righteousness was predicted to come through Messiah. And if you missed that portion of the broadcast last week, I encourage you to watch that. And so, I don't know why this thing keeps popping up where I have to keep adding the two things at the bottom. Apologize for the PowerPoint today. Anyway, he has this time of discouragement. But what I want to point out here is yet another prophecy where the servant in Isaiah 53 would match other prophecies indicating, particularly the one in Isaiah 49, saying that this servant is the salvation of Yahweh to the ends of the earth. He is the salvation of Yahweh. Now, why would he be the salvation of Yahweh? Because isn't that what we all need? Is we need salvation? Because what we need is somehow for our sins to be forgiven. If our sins are forgiven, then we are blessed. If our sins are forgiven, then when we die, we can be pulled out of the grave and be saved. And so it makes sense to me why, as a result of what the Messiah did in Isaiah chapter 53, that our sins would be forgiven, because our sin, it says, he bore them. And so if he bore them, that means we don't have to bear them. Therefore, our sins can be forgiven. And so, through this time of discouragement, he becomes the salvation of Yahweh to the ends of the earth, and that's one reason why his name would be Yahushua, because Yahushua means Yahweh is salvation. And he could be called Israel as well, because this was Yahweh's goal for Israel, was that their actions would bring salvation to other nations. And so to me it all lines up. Alright, continue reading Isaiah 53. And he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. So he died, this servant, this Messiah. He died. They made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. No wonder he was discouraged, because they killed him. But through that death, it says here, 53 verse 10, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seat. So the servant's soul was an offering for sin. So our sin was placed on him. He became an offering to Yahweh. He shall see seed. He shall prolong days, indicating he will be raised again. Otherwise, you wouldn't see it. And the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. Now, the seed here can be physical, it can be literal, it can be spiritual. We see that a number of times in Scripture. In this case, it would be spiritual. He shall see the labor of his soul, this Yahweh shall see the labor of his soul, and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great. So he's going to reward him. He shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul into death. He was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. So he is one who is an intercessory. Isn't that what the high priest does? He makes intercession. And so there are clear connections here between Isaiah 53 and 52 and the earlier prophecies in Isaiah 11 and Isaiah 49. We also see a suffering servant in Isaiah chapter 50. And we can turn there. It says, who among you fears Yahweh? Who obeys the voice of, here we are, a servant? Who walks in darkness has no light. Let him trust in the name of Yahweh and rely upon his Elohim. Well, go back, you find out who this servant is, and it says here in Isaiah 50 verse 6, I gave my back to those who struck me. I gave my cheeks to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. So this servant is one who suffers, for the Master Yahweh will help me. See, he's going to be rewarded. Therefore I will not be disgraced. Therefore I set my face like a flint. I know I will not be ashamed. He is near who justifies me. Who will contend with me? Let us stand together. Who is my adversary? Let him come near me. Surely the Master Yahweh will help me. Who is he who will condemn me? Indeed, they will all grow old, indicating he won't. Like a garment, the moth will eat them up. Who among you fears Yahweh? Who obeys the voice of his servant? Who walks in darkness and has no light? Let him trust in the name of Yahweh and rely upon his Elohim. And then the servant speaks. He says, look, all you who kindle a fire, who circle yourselves with sparks, walk in the light of your fire and the sparks you have kindled. This you shall have from my hand. You shall lie down in torment. And so after suffering, this servant strengthens himself in Yahweh and takes vengeance. The same themes we saw in Isaiah 49, Isaiah 52 and 53, and Isaiah chapter 11. When you put them all together, they paint the same picture here as what we see here in Isaiah chapter 50. So it's for this reason ancient Jews, the ones who come around before Maimonides, the ones who were living in the first century, they actually write in the Talmud that there is a Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Yosef. And Messiah ben Yosef is a suffering Messiah. Messiah ben David is a kingly Messiah, because they did not understand that actually it's the same one. And the same one's doing both roles. They were close, but they hadn't yet grasped that it's really the same Messiah doing both. And because he suffered, because he did these things, the sins of others were placed on him. And he delivers those who trust in him. But those who don't trust in him, he says, you'll lie down in torment. So he is going to be one who, the same one in Isaiah 50, who suffers, is also going to be one who inflicts pain with the sword of his mouth, with the breath of his lips, and the list goes on. Do we see how this all just melds together as one picture of what the Messiah would do? And we can do this just by comparing verse to verse to verse. Find out what the Messiah is truly going to be like. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now I want to zero in here a little bit more on the discouragement of the Messiah, the things that he suffered. It says that he was considered smitten by Elohim and afflicted. His face was marred more than any man. It says he plucked out the beard and all these things. Are there other scriptures that may give us an even more detailed description of what the Messiah was going to go through? We can look in Psalm 22. Read through this here. Psalm 22 verse 1 says, my Elohim, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me, and from the words of my groaning? O my Elohim, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season, and am not silent. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, despised by the people. There's the one. Despised and rejected by men. Isaiah chapter 53. All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, he trusted in Yahweh, let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are he who took me out of the womb. There we are. This reference to the womb again. You made me trust while on my mother's breasts. I was cast upon you from birth. From my mother's womb you have been my Elohim. We read earlier that from his mother's womb he was called to a task. He hasn't forgotten that, why he was called. While he's suffering, he's remembering why he was born. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. This can't be David. I mean, it's a Davidic psalm, but bones are out of joint? That ever happened to David? Who is this? My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me. That's the Gentiles. The congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. Now, I realize in the Masoretic text that most of the Jewish people read from today, what they have here for pierced is lion. Lion. And so for that reason, over the centuries, a lot of the Jewish people did not believe that this particular psalm would be speaking of a pierced one. They said, well, like a lion are my hands and my feet. And and the reason, because the Masoretic text actually reads lion. But the Septuagint, or the Greek New Testament, or Greek Old Testament, actually read pierced. And for that reason, the Christians will go along with the Septuagint reading. And so there were debates down through the centuries as to whether it should have been lion or whether it should have been pierced. Well, then we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I'm not going to be able to reflect the Hebrew here, but read differently. The Masoretic text of Psalm 22, verse 16, yes, it does have Ka'ari, which is lion. But the Dead Sea Scrolls read Ka'aru, which is pierced. And the difference between the two, and I'm going to go ahead and draw out the Hebrew here. Ka'ari is Chet, Resh, and Yod. But Ka'aru is Chet, Resh, Wav. And so the difference between the two words is whether you're going to really just kind of add this extension here on the first word. And so there must have been a scribe who changed the yod to a wav somewhere between the 1st century and about the 9th and 10th centuries, where we have the Masoretic text. And so anciently the more correct reading is pierced, no doubt about it, according to the Dead Sea Scrolls. And the Septuagint is also reading pierced. And so lion would not be the correct reading. That is a later reading. And so when we're looking at this this text, there is someone who is being described here in Psalm 22 who is going through awful, awful suffering. His bones are out of joint. His heart's like wax. His heart's melted within him. His strength is dried up. His tongue clings to his jaws. He's brought to the dust of death, and his hands and feet are pierced. Now, there is no other instrument of torture known in the ancient world that would pierce both hands and feet other than the Roman crucifixion. And so who are we talking about here? It should be pretty obvious. It is a suffering Messiah. This is giving more detail of how he suffered. He says, I can count all my bones. They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them. And for my clothing they cast lots. These are all things that actually happened to the one called Yahushua. And through the books of Matthew to John, all these things happened. But you, O Yahweh, do not be far from me. See, he's strengthening himself in Yahweh through all this. O my strength, hasten to help me. Deliver me from the sword, my precious life, from the power of the dog. That's the Gentiles. It was the Gentiles who actually inflicted this punishment on the Messiah. Now, the Jewish people did deliver him to them, but the Gentiles were the ones who actually performed it. And so both Jew and Gentile are actually ones responsible. And the Gentiles always wanted to, oh, the Jews did this, the Jews did that. We all did it. We all did. So I don't get into racial superiority either way. Verse 21, save me from the lion's mouth and from the horns of the wild oxen. You have answered me. I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you. You who fear Yahweh, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, glorify him. And fear him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, nor has he hidden his face from him. But when he cried to him, he heard. Well, if he died, brought to the dust of death, how did he hear him? What did he do? He raised him from the dead. That's what he did. He raised him from the dead. And we can get more into that in the next broadcast. But I want to take a moment here and share about some of the prophecies that we have read so far. Some of the prophecies that we have read so far, and what New Testament, or I don't even like to call it New Testament, just the addition of the Torah, prophets, and writings, compare the record of the one called Yahushua, Messiah, in the first century, and see where and how and when he actually fulfilled these things. Well, we see in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 13, it says, "Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high." Well, Yahushua came and spake unto them, saying, in Matthew 28:18, "All power is given to me in heaven and on earth." He is Melchizedek priesthood, and he is a king. This is after he rose again. Isaiah 52:14, "Just as many as were astonished at you." Well, in Matthew 7:28, talking about the Messiah, it says that the people were astonished at his doctrine. It says, "So his visage was marred more than any man, his form more than the sons of men. They spat on his face, they beat him, they struck him with the palms of their hand, and they mocked him. So shall he sprinkle many nations, kings shall shut their mouths at him, for what had not been told them they shall see, and what they had not heard they shall consider." He sprinkles many nations. It's the blood of Messiah that is being used here to sprinkle and cleanse the nations, because he bore their iniquities. Therefore his blood would cleanse them from their iniquities. And that's why it says in the book of Hebrews 9:13, "For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifies for purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Messiah, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to Yahweh, cleanse your conscience." It's a spiritual offering. "Your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim." So, when the Messiah bore the sins of many, his blood became a sign. His life, the life is in the blood. His blood, his life is what cleansed us. His righteousness is placed on us. Our sin is placed on him, if we are willing to receive him. That is the teaching of Isaiah 53, that he bore our iniquities like a sin offering, a guilt offering, a sham in Hebrew. And so that's why the New Testament speaks of him in this manner, that because he bore our iniquities and because his soul was an offering for sin, that offering cleanses us. And that's why Isaiah 52 says he will sprinkle many nations. "Who has believed our report? To whom has the arm of Yahweh been revealed?" That's the other element. John 12:27, the New Testament says, "Although he had done so many signs before them, they did not believe in him." That was a prediction, that they would not believe. The arm of Yahweh is the king, the arm that rules for him. And yet they did not accept him. They rejected him. Just like it says in the rest of Isaiah. For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when we see him, there's no beauty that we should desire him. If you read Luke chapter 2, you can read his youth, the time when he was a boy, and that even when he was a boy, he knew his calling. He knew why he came. Isaiah 53 verse 3, he is despised and rejected by men. And look at how they treated him when he came. The Jews answered and said to him, Do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Yahushua answered, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. It was all predicted. Mark 15:17, they clothed him with purple, and they twisted a crown of thorns, put it on his head, and began to salute him, Hail, King of the Jews. Then they struck him on the head with a reed and spat on him, and bowing the knee, they worshipped him. And when they mocked him, they took the purple off of him, put his own clothes on him, and led him out to crucify him. Talk about being despised and rejected. Wow. A man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. In Matthew 26:17, it says, He took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And he said to them, My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me. He almost died just from the sorrow. He went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him, and he was despised. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. When his disciple was talking to the Sanhedrin at that time, Acts 3:13, the Elohim of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Elohim of our fathers, glorified his servant Yahushua. See, there he is, he's called a servant, whom you delivered up and denied in the presence of Pilate, when he was determined to let him go, but you denied the Holy One and the just. There he is. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised. We did not esteem him. Now he told them, Yet now, brethren, I know you did it in ignorance, as did also your rulers. But those things which Elohim foretold by the mouth of all his prophets, that the Messiah would suffer, he has thus fulfilled. It happened, just like the prophets said would happen. That's what he's trying to explain to them. It turns out the leaders were afraid. There were many tens of thousands of Jews that believed in the first century. Isaiah 53 verse 4, Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by Elohim, and afflicted. Matthew 27:41 says, Likewise the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, He saved others. Himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the tree, the cross, and we will believe in him. By the way, it's not a cross, it's a staros, or a stake. He trusted in Elohim, let him deliver him now, if he will have him, for he said, I am the son of Elohim. If you read Psalm chapter 2, it's pretty clear that the Messiah is the son of Elohim. That's in Psalm 2. But they consider him to be smitten by Elohim, and so that's why they're treating him this way. That's why they're saying these things about him. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement for our peace was upon him. By his stripes we are healed. Yahushua said in Matthew 20 verse 28, Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. He knew why he came. John 12:27. Now my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? but for this purpose I came to this hour. He knew what he came for. Isaiah 53 verse 6, all we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Matthew 18:11, for the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. What do you think? If a man has 100 sheep, one of them goes astray, does he not leave the 99 and go to the mountains to seek the one that is straying? And if he should find it, assuredly I say to you, he rejoices more over that sheep than over the 99 that did not go astray. Even so, it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. And so, we are the sheep that went astray. Every one of us have sinned. And so every one of us need a suffering servant to bear our sin for us. On him was laid all of our iniquities. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Matthew 27 verse 12, while he is being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. And the Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he answered him not one word. So the governor marveled greatly. Isaiah 53 verse 8, he was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? He was locked up in unable to escape just before his crucifixion. Matthew 26:65, then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, he's spoken blasphemy. What further do we need? We have a witness. Says, look, you've heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, he's deserving of death. So there, he was taken from judgment here. And so he appeared before the high priest in judgment. They claimed he spoke blasphemy, whereas really the only thing he said was the very things that the prophets predicted the Messiah would do. And also, in Isaiah 53:8, for he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgressions of my people he was stricken. Well, that might be verse 9, but Daniel 9:26, it says after 62 weeks, it says Messiah shall be cut off. That's one thing that you may not hear in Jewish circles today, as a Messiah who is actually cut off. That's what happened. In Luke 23:46, when Yahushua cried out with a loud voice, he said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Having said this, he breathed his last. So, he was cut off from the land of the living. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. Mark 15:27 talks about this. They tried to put him with the wicked, so with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right hand, the other on his left, but when he died, here's what really happened. Matthew 27:57. Now when evening had come, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who himself had become a disciple of Yahushua. This man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Yahushua, and Pilate commanded the body to be given to him. So a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph came and took his body and laid it in his tomb. So he was with the rich at his death. Why? Because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yahushua told the people of his day, which of you convicts me of sin? John 8:46. No one could. And if I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? And so he did not respond with violence. In 1 Peter 2:21 says, when he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. He trusted in Yahweh. Just like Psalm 22 and other places declare. Yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see seed. He shall prolong days, and the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. And John 1:29 says, the next day John saw Yahushua coming toward him and said, Behold, the Lamb of Elohim who takes away the sin of the world. Why? Because he's an offering for sin, the offering that we needed. And if you keep reading Psalm 22, which the psalm that details the Messiah's death, it says, a posterity, a seed, some generations afterward, will serve him. It will be recounted of the master to the next generation. So he rises again because there's a seed that comes after him. Now it's a spiritual seed. Spiritually his children, in that he taught them, he instructed them, he instructed us, and so we learn from him as a son would learn from a father. And so we are the seed coming after. Isaiah 53 verse 11, He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Romans 5:1, Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with Yahweh through our Master Yahushua, the Messiah. Verse 12, Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, he shall divide the spoil with the strong. We saw that in Psalm 110. We saw that in many other scriptures where he is exalted. Philippians 2:8 says, And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, became obedient to the point of death, even to the death of the tree or the stake. Therefore Yahweh has highly exalted him and given him the name which is above every name. It says he divides the spoil with the strong. Well, he disarmed, spiritually speaking, principalities and powers that had power over us because of our sin. He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them. Verse 12, Because he poured out his soul unto death. Matthew 26:38, he said to them, My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. And we read this earlier, where he said, Father, let this cup pass from me. Not as I will, though, as you will. And he was numbered with the transgressors, as we looked at earlier. They crucified two robbers, one on his right, the other on his left, Mark 15:27. Bore the sin of many. Hebrews 9:27, as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment. So the Messiah was offered once to bear the sins of many. There we go. And made intercession for the transgressors. So he is an intercessory figure. That's why he's a priest, because a priest stands as an intercessory figure, yet he's also king. And to me, Isaiah 53 verse 12, the fact that he would be making intercession would tie Isaiah 53:12 to Psalm 110 and to Zechariah 6, where he's not only the ruler, he's also a priest. Romans 8:33 says, Who shall bring a charge against Yahweh's elect? It is Yahweh who justifies. Who is he who condemns? It is Messiah who died. And furthermore, he is also risen, who is even at the right hand of Yahweh, who also makes intercession for us. So he's at the right hand. We read that in Psalm chapter 110, where Yahweh said to my master, Sit at my right hand. He's there making intercession. Intercessory priest in the heavenly temple. And so it all lines up in a beautiful way, in an amazingly beautiful way. Now, want to point out real quick here, Psalm 22, verse 16. He says, "For dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones." His bones were not broken. "They look and stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots for his clothing." And that's what happened. John 19:23, "The soldiers, when they had crucified Yahushua, took his garments and made 4 parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top in one piece. They said therefore among themselves, Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be." You know, and these are just some examples of some verses in what's called New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, so on, that would demonstrate the record of a man who fit the bill perfectly of what the Messiah is supposed to do. And so, and there's never been another man since who has ever matched his example. And so, what we find here in this, what's called New Testament, are numerous examples of where the true prophecies of what the Messiah would do are actually meeting their fulfillment. Now, one thing that's never prophesied about the Messiah is that he would abolish the law. Not once. Not once. Nowhere. In fact, just the opposite. And nowhere does it did Yahushua ever promote the observance of pagan-rooted festivals. Instead, he promoted the festivals that are in the Torah. Pesach, Shavuot, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, the Feast of Trumpets. That's what he was about. In fact, those things picture him. Those things are prophetic pictures of him. And it's our choice as to whether we want this servant of Isaiah 53 to bear our iniquities, and whether we want him to make intercession for us, because we are all guilty of sinning at least once in our life, at least once. And so we need this servant who is called to bear the iniquity of us all, as it says in Isaiah 53. We just need to accept him, and he'll do that. Are we willing to accept him? That's the only question. Have our eyes been opened to the hidden arrow in Yahweh's quiver? Do we believe the report? Even the unbelief of many was predicted. Will we be willing to accept him, or will we reject him and become his enemy? We don't want to become his enemy. We see what he's going to do to his enemies. We don't want to be one of them. And so I call on you today, if you don't believe, to believe. I think that what I've shared here in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in the prophecies, is that they are all speaking one message. A suffering servant who's hidden from the eyes of others, who ultimately becomes the ultimate rags to riches story, who was put down even though he was righteous, and he was given the kingship. A little bit like Joseph, who was put into slavery, but then given the role of being second in command. And that's what Messiah is. He is second in command. He's not equal to the Father. He is subject to the Father. He called the Father his Elohim many times. In spite of what Trinitarian things that may have been promoted by those who just don't understand who he is yet completely. And so now I have presented a Messiah that fits the biblical prophecies and never did away with Torah, not once. And we're going to talk about that next week. We're going to talk about how not only did he not do away with the Torah, he is pictured in the Torah. And when we keep Torah, we are actually picturing what he is all about. So I look forward to sharing again next week. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. And we also have the question and answering period here after the break here. We're going to have a time of questions and answers. Looking forward to sharing and also hearing some comments from others as well that might further demonstrate just why Yahushua truly is the Messiah.